Hello everybody, welcome back to another edition of Ed Puzzle Notes. Today we're going to move on to the mechanisms of evolution. Basically, what are the things that cause evolution to occur? Or what causes genetic equilibrium to be thrown off? So what can cause the percentage or frequency of alleles to go up in a population, or what can cause that percentage to go down? So for example, I don't know what percentage of the United States has blue eyes, but let's say we'll say 20% have blue eyes. Well, what could cause that percentage to go up? I don't know, maybe 25% or 30%. What could cause it to go down? So these are all these mechanisms of evolution. All it is are things that can cause the frequency or the percentage of these alleles in a population to either go up or to go down. And the first and most important thing that can cause the frequency or percentage of alleles to go up or down, natural selection. Natural selection, this is basically survival of the fittest. So that alleles, which give you traits that are negative to survival, so they're actually bad, they do not give you a better chance to survive, well, those alleles for those traits should go down in frequency if they're negative. And at the same time, genes or alleles that aid survival, which makes it easier, more likely that you're going to survive, those alleles should increase in frequency. So their percentage should go up if they are good for survival and reproducing. If they're negative to survival, those alleles should go down. Another obvious thing that can change the frequency or percentage of alleles in populations is immigration and emigration. So earlier I kind of guessed, I don't know, if we have like 20% blue eyes in our classroom, I don't think it's that high. But what if we had some foreign exchange students of immigration from, say, like Sweden? Blue eyes and blonde hair, those alleles are extremely common in Sweden. So that would cause our frequency of blue eyes to go up in our classroom because of immigration. And the same thing could happen through emigration. Once those people from Sweden go back to Sweden, now our frequencies of blue-eyed allele will go back down. So immigration and emigration can also cause allele frequencies to go both up and down. And the next thing is called genetic drift. Genetic drift also causes changes in the gene frequency or changes in the percentage of alleles in population. But unlike natural selection, where with natural selection you had organisms that had higher fitness, so therefore they had a better chance to survive and reproduce, and that's why those alleles went up. With genetic drift, it is basically due to chance events or luck. So basically genetic drift has to do with luck. Are you lucky? Are you unlucky? So down here we have a population of beetles. So we have 3 green ones and 6 tan ones. Now this guy comes walking along, and assuming that they're not in the grass, so the green ones were harder to see, and that's why they got stepped on. But if there were equal chance of all these little guys getting stepped on, he accidentally stepped on 2 of the green ones. So we went from 3 green down to 1, and the tan one stayed at 6. So the frequency of that green allele through genetic drift, just by bad luck of getting stepped on, the frequency of the green allele went way, way down, where the frequency of the tan allele went up, because there's the same number of tan beetles, but there's less green beetles, so the tan allele went up just by being lucky. And that's what genetic drift is. Now, how does genetic drift affect small versus large populations? Obviously, in small populations, genetic drift will have a much bigger effect than on large populations. The reason is, this is a very tiny population of beetles. With only 9 beetles, if you kill 2, that's a big part of the population that's going away. If that was a population of, say, 1,000,000 beetles, and you step on 2, no big deal. That's not going to really change the percentage or frequency that much. But when you have smaller populations, these random allele frequency changes can be pretty big. All right, 2 different examples of genetic drift. And basically, they're kind of the same thing, really, if you think about it. Population bottleneck and the founder effect. Both of these we can show with this picture right here. So you can see this population over here on the left. There's 23 people in total, and there's only one, this guy right here, that has whatever that red thing is. So 1 out of 23 have whatever that trait is that gives you, I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it gives you that red thing on your chest. So with a population bottleneck, so we're going to pretend like on this population on the left, some volcano erupted and wiped out most of the population. Now, instead of 23 people, in the middle here, we're down to 5. But now, instead of 1 out of 23 having that trait for whatever that red thing is, now it's 1 out of 5. So now it's 1 out of 5 equals 20%. So when this island repopulates after several generations, now a much larger percentage of this new population has this trait for whatever that red thing is. And that's called population bottleneck. When a large part of the population gets wiped out due to, I don't know, meteor impact, drought, fire, volcano eruption, whatever. Now the founder effect is the same exact thing. So we got this population over here with 23 of these people without the little red dot and one person with a little red dot. Now instead of all these people getting wiped out and dying, this is where a small little pocket of the population decide, hey, I'm going to emigrate out. I'm going to find some new land over here. So they move away, these 5. And now, once again, it's like a sampling error where that trait used to be extremely rare in the original population. Only 1 out of 23 people had it. Now, in this new population, it's not even close to as rare because now 1 in 5 people have whatever that trait is that that guy right there has with the red dot. Now, once again, when they repopulate their new island, a much larger percentage of the new population is going to have that little red, whatever that red trait is, compared to the original population. And that's called the founder effect. Round of event where a portion of a larger population migrates away, like these guys migrated here, but the migrants don't have the same frequency of alleles as the original population. So that allele for the red trait became much more common in the new population due to the founder effect. All right, some more mechanisms of evolution that can affect or change the frequency or percentage of alleles in populations. Well, one of them, it's the main source of any changes in DNA, mutations. Changes in the genetic code of reproductive cells will be passed on to future generations. So random mutations, that's when DNA is making a copy of itself. It makes a mistake, which leads to different genes and different alleles. Another thing that can change the percentage or frequency of alleles in a population, which causes evolution, is isolation. Isolation, that's where you have a population and they get separated from each other for whatever reason, into separate groups that no longer interact. Therefore, they are no longer part of the same gene pool because their genes are no longer mixing. They're isolated from each other, so they're no longer going to share the same gene pool. So over many, many years, many, many generations, these two populations who got separated from each other, they can actually evolve to become two separate species if they're separated from each other for long enough. And what are some types of isolation? Well, the most obvious one is geographic isolation. Basically, that's you're separated by land, maybe an ocean, maybe mountains, maybe the Grand Canyon, whatever. Any kind of landform keeps the species separated from each other so they cannot mate again. Therefore, they may evolve into two separate species. They're gonna evolve different characteristics. All right, reproductive isolation. I'm not gonna really go over that much because I'm not gonna test you on it. But these are things where the population, they're still together. They haven't been isolated from each other like geographically, like physically isolated. They're still together, but there are some things that can prevent populations from trading genes. Like, for example, maybe mating habits, or like hybrids, they cannot reproduce, even though they, like mules, they try to reproduce, they cannot, because they're reproductively isolated from each other. They can't reproduce, even though they're right next to each other. They're not physically isolated. They can't reproduce for whatever reason. But don't worry about that. I'm not going to test you on it. This, on the other hand, I will. Speciation. It's basically the process of making. You start with one species, and they branch off, maybe through geographic isolation or whatever, and they end up turning into two separate species. So it's a formation of two or more species from a single species, and that results because of changes in genetic equilibrium. Remember, genetic equilibrium, all that is, it doesn't mean that it's totally equal. Changes in genetic equilibrium means that certain alleles become more common and other alleles become less common, usually due to natural selection. And that can lead to speciation, or the formation of two or more species. And here's the Grand Canyon, Colorado River down here. Well, when this thing opened up millions of years ago, there was a population of squirrels. Well, the Colorado River kind of interrupted them. When it made this huge canyon, some little squirrels were over here on this side, while the other squirrels got isolated from each other and they were on this side. Well, they no longer, these are not flying squirrels, so they no longer could interact with each other. They're isolated. Well, over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, those squirrels actually evolved to become two separate species of squirrels. Hey, and there they are. These are the two different species of squirrels in the Grand Canyon. There used to be one species of squirrel. There was a population of squirrels, but old Mr. Colorado River came in, made the Grand Canyon, split these two populations up, isolated them from each other. And after thousands and thousands and thousands of years, they're still squirrels. They didn't turn into like dinosaurs or anything, but they actually evolved into two totally separate species of squirrels just due to being geographically isolated from each other over long periods of time. All right, down to the last couple slides. Lamarckism. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He was a French naturalist back in the 1500s. He had his own theory of evolution. He believed in what's called the inheritance of acquired characteristics. He did believe that some organisms were more well adapted to their environment, and those guys tended to survive and reproduce, but he believed that those organisms got the traits during their lifetime, which then are passed on to their babies or their offspring. They called it use it or lose it. So he has a well-known theory about giraffe evolution on how they got their long necks. He believed that giraffe ancestors had shorter necks, which he'd have been correct about that. But he believed that while trying to stretch up to reach the leaves in trees, that the giraffes actually stretched their necks just a little bit during their lifetime. And therefore, when they had baby giraffes, their necks would be a little bit longer than their parents. And those baby giraffes would reach up for trees and they would stretch their necks just a little bit. So they would pass on their just slightly longer necks to their babies. And over several generations, the necks just got longer and longer and longer. Now, this is not true. Even though Lamarck did a lot of good things, his theory about giraffe evolution, how you can stretch your neck, and that stretching can actually be passed on to your kids? No. Stretching does not get passed on to your kids. Your DNA, your chromosomes, your genes get passed on to your kids. Stretching does not change your DNA. It does not change your genes. All right, one little thing. So Lamarck's explanation, he correctly saw that giraffe ancestors had short necks. And he had to say that because you could see it in the fossils. You can see that old fossil giraffes had short necks. Well, he believed that they had to reach high up in the trees for leaves and they stretched their necks, and they became longer. And I'm sure you can stretch your neck and make it a little tiny bit longer. But your offspring will not inherit that longer neck from you stretching it. Because once again, stretching your neck does not change your DNA. And it's your DNA, your chromosomes that you're passing on to your offspring, not your stretching. So know that Lamarck, this is not an accurate view of evolution. And in contrast with Lamarck, here's how Darwin would explain the giraffe evolution using his theory of natural selection, not inheritance of an acquired characteristic. He believed, just like Lamarck, that ancestors had short necks, but he did believe that they were stretching, but he believed that certain giraffes just naturally had slightly longer necks. Some of them, just for whatever reason, just mutations in their DNA, they had just slightly longer necks than their neighbor. Well, if you have slightly longer, you can reach slightly higher up into the tree for leaves. That gives you an advantage. Now since they had mutations in their DNA which gave them their longer necks, since it's in their DNA, it's in their genes, boom, that can be passed on to the baby giraffes. So giraffes with longer necks tend to survive, and they pass these genes or these alleles for long necks to their offspring. And that's what caused the frequency of longer neck alleles to go up, because it was beneficial to surviving, while the alleles for having shorter necks would go down. It would get lesser and lesser and lesser. All right, that is all for today. Thank you very much. I think we got one left, so finish strong, Chiefs.